Have you ever wondered the difference between sphagnum peat moss and cocoa fiber pots? Well, in this video, we're going to get into it. I just want to say thank you so much to ISM for bringing this to the surface. If you haven't checked out our monthly membership, I highly recommend to do so. Just for $2.99, your questions get sent to the top for quick replies. I'm asking for a little more support to build up my war chest so that I can continue to keep giving you open and honest reviews, and we can further defend our right for free speech. Thank you so much, everyone. After releasing the video, Jiffy Pots Kill My Plants, this gentleman reached out to me and said, hey, just want to show you that cocoa fiber pots break down and don't do the same thing Jiffy Pots do. And after taking a double look at his pictures versus the Jiffy Pots, and taking a look at them, I realized that the Jiffy Pots are actually made from sphagnum peat moss, and obviously the cocoa fibers are made from cocoa. So let's go ahead and show you the difference. If you watched this video, you would have seen that throughout this video I was showing you how the pot actually never broke down, and throughout this grow, initially this was one of my clients, we were running into plant deficiency issues, and through the process of literally just helping to create more airflow and water and allow the water to penetrate the soil system, we were able to fix the problem. Although after digging up the root system, we were able to see really what was the culprit. So as you can see right here in the videos that ISM sent me, right here, the root system had no issue breaking through and flourishing. So at the end of the day, guys, if you're out there, I would highly recommend to just be aware of the materials that you're using. Know what these things are made of. A couple other additional things about sphagnum peat moss, right, is they have to actually drain the bogs and scrape the top layer of that material, and then they end up harvesting it, drying it out, shoving it in a box, and shipping it out to you. That sphagnum peat moss actually does not regenerate very quickly. So us as consumers have to start being more aware of the harvesting or the manufacturing practices of these materials. This is a large reason why a lot of manufacturers have actually switched over from sphagnum peat moss over to cocoa fiber. And right, cocoa fiber, it has its own problems, right? And I've talked about it all the time. Because of its fibrous material, it's very similar to biochar, and it actually needs to kind of fill in its surface area with the trace minerals, because it'll be robbing of trace minerals until it kind of finds its homeostasis. At the end of the day, though, if I had to pick between sphagnum peat moss or cocoa fiber, there are some better practices. Like, for example, I would use sphagnum peat moss with popping seeds, but I wouldn't use sphagnum peat moss as my primary media because it could end up causing issues around the root system because of how it compacts around the root systems as the plant grows. Either way, if I'm using sphagnum peat moss or cocoa, I would definitely be mixing in some type of humic layer, because over time I have found that both medias do better with the humic layer of some level. Something like worm castings or something thrown in there. So those worm castings are capable of retaining the minerals, while that root system with that growing media finds a homeostasis with each other. So I think some of the most significant things to remember whether growing in sphagnum peat moss or growing in cocoa, and I know initially in this video we were talking about the pots, but some of the major brands in this industry is Sunshine Mix No. 4 and also ProMix. Because those two brands are pretty much in almost every single grocery store throughout the United States and in pretty much probably the rest of the world, you have to understand that sphagnum peat moss, after it comes into contact with nitrogen, it begins to decompose. So it's not a bad thing. It's just about understanding how to grow with sphagnum peat moss. And again, I'm not trying to encourage someone to grow with sphagnum peat moss because we already talked about it. It's not really the most sustainable product. The cocoa fiber is, although if you are going to use it, just understanding how to use it, I think, is going to be important. So often you're going to hear people say that you don't want to use it 100% for hydroponics. And again, why is that, right? It's because of the liquid nitrogen that after it comes into contact with sphagnum peat moss begins to break down, compact, and then it begins to have an anaerobic experience around the root system. Basically mean you're going to have a low oxygen environment around the root system. This is why I always encourage, if you're going to be growing with sphagnum peat moss, you also want to have, again, rebuilding that humic layer. Yeah, sphagnum peat moss might be great for starting seedlings because it does have some micronutrients. Although after you get past the seedling stage, you're really going to want to add worm castings and some type of a heavier humic layer, just because when that sphagnum peat moss once again begins to break down, you don't want to totally compact on that roots, and you're going to want to make sure a good oxygen airflow happens between the root system and your soil growing media. This kind of also going back to cocoa. This is why I also recommend to use some earthworm castings, at least 20% in your cocoa fiber. We've talked about this. There is such a large surface area in that cocoa fiber, and that cocoa fiber is going to actually suck up the trace minerals very quickly. That's why you'll very often see a magnesium deficiency when growing with cocoa. And that's because initially, as you're using it, the magnesium is being sucked up in the surface area of the cocoa fiber. Guys, you really have to take in consideration why these growing medias have been heavily encouraged and indoctrinated into our minds to thinking that these were great growing medias. And it's because of the high salt content that all of these nutrient fertilizers are encouraging you to give your plants. And they know that if you give them a humic layer like worm castings, no way in hell the plant's going to be able to handle that type of salt buildup. They needed something to be able to flush out really quickly and restart the system. And in a sense, too, it's kind of a ripoff when these growing medias don't really hold on to these salts. So you're kind of just flushing out your money. That's why I always, when people approach me growing with cocoa, I always encourage them to go to as little runoff as possible with cocoa. Right when they do that, they normally end up seeing a dramatic turnaround just because they're not flushing out all the trace minerals that their soil system has done over the last 24 to 48 hours or between their last watering. And don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. At the end of the grow, if something was going on or you didn't really know what was going on, dig up the plant and see what the root system looked like. What is their root system, right? There's many plant deficiency and plant toxicity videos where I actually showed you texts from my clients saying, hey, I'm never going to use this nutrient line again because there was no root system or whatever, which that is indications of possibly phosphorus or potassium toxicities. Getting interested in these plants will make you a better grower. Just not taking the yield and saying, wow, this is the best stuff that's out there. No, really actually being critical on your thought process, looking at the plants. Do they look healthy? Do they actually look beautiful at the end of the grow? Even the flower looks great. Are the leaves crumbly or have plant toxicity or deficiencies in them? It's absolutely important, guys, to celebrate the win. Don't get me wrong here. At the end of the grow, when you complete it, you harvest it, and you have finished product, be grateful and be happy for what you have. Although, don't pass by the opportunity to take a critical look at yourself, take a critical look at your growing practices, and see if you can improve on the following grow. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And once again, Ism, thank you so much for taking the time to send me this information and taking the time to send me these pictures. It's always going to help out the following growers. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The curing process starts when you plant the seed to when the end consumer actually uses your product, right? And I'm talking about brand building and caring about your product all the way up to the point where the end consumer uses it and they're like, wow,